Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our TACIR meeting. Appreciate you all being here. We'll call the meeting to order, and the first order of business is the minutes of the January meeting. You have those in your packet. For purposes of discussion or any additions or corrections to the minutes, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Now, do we have any discussion, questions, additions, or corrections to the minutes? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of approval of the minutes, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. All opposed likewise. Minutes are approved. We're down to tab 2, which is Commission and Staff Update. I'll turn that over to Cliff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, of course, the first item in the commission update is, as I'm sure you've all heard by now, we were sad to hear the passing of longtime TACIR Commission member Charlie Cardwell. Charlie passed away on May 13, 2019. There's a resolution honoring Trustee Cardwell's long and esteemed public service, and it's attached at the back of the memo. Among other public contributions, it notes that Trustee Cardwell served on the commission from 1988 to 1989 while State Revenue Commissioner under Governor Ned McWhorter, and then continuously from 2003 until his death, and was elected to the office of trustee 7 times. He, of course, will be missed. Also, on a much happier note, we would like to welcome several new members to the commission. We have our two newest members are both private citizens appointees, and they are both appointed by Governor Lee. The first is Mr. Calvin Clifton, and then Mr. Jeff Peach, both sitting down here at the end where we make all the new members sit. Mr. Peach is an attorney serving as a private mediator and as the town attorney for Smyrna, Tennessee. Mr. Clifton of Kingsport is a business development manager with the engineering firm Mattern and Craig. Mr. Clifton also serves on the Sullivan County Emergency Communications Board and the Kingsport Board of Zoning Appeals, so sort of a board groupie. So, and welcome to both of you. And of course, we want to thank our 2 private citizen members who just rolled off the commission, Ken Young and Christy Gibbs, and we have certificates honoring their service, and those were also attached to tab 2. And then finally, on commission updates, I would like you to, if you could, to join us in congratulating former member Iliff McMahon on his recent retirement from the state of Tennessee. Yes. Director McMahon was a commission member since 2011, had a long storied career of public service. I would go over some of those highlights now, but we do have a resolution honoring him. And since he has been kind enough to join us here for maybe not one last commission meeting, but for at least another commission meeting, if we could ask him to stand, and Research Manager Mark McAdoo is going to read the resolution honoring Iliff.
Thank you, Cliff, Mr. Chairman, members. I'm Mark McAdoo, Research Manager with TACIR, and it's my privilege to present a resolution to honor Mr. Iliff McMahon, Jr. of Newport, Tennessee, upon his retirement from the state of Tennessee, whereas it is appropriate to honor public servants upon the formal completion of their careers who have performed their duties with the utmost integrity and whose efforts have improved the quality of life for the citizens of Tennessee. And whereas Iliff McMahon, a native of Newport, Tennessee, is a veteran of the United States Army and was honorably discharged in 1973. Whereas Iliff McMahon earned his Bachelor of Arts and Master of Fine Arts from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Whereas Iliff McMahon has benefited from the love and support of his wife, Deborah, and his 2 stepdaughters, Sarah and Lexi. Whereas Iliff McMahon began his professional career working at the Washington Post newspaper with both the marketing and advertising departments for 10 years. Whereas Iliff McMahon returned and settled in Cocke County, Tennessee in 1995, where he served as the first tourism director for the Cocke County, successfully promoting tourism and business development. Whereas Iliff McMahon served as the first tourism director for the Morristown Hamblin County Chamber of Commerce, and then later as the general manager of the chamber. Whereas Iliff McMahon served as the Marketing and Public Relations Manager for Newport Utilities. Whereas Iliff McMahon was elected Cocke County Mayor in 2002, serving 2 terms. Whereas Iliff McMahon served as Assistant Commissioner for the Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development, where he was the department's liaison with the federal government, with the Tennessee General Assembly, the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, and the rural counties in Tennessee. Whereas Iliff McMahon served as the Regional Director for Northeast Tennessee for the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development, where he directed the state's efforts to recruit and expand new international business investments in Tennessee and promote economic development. Whereas Iliff McMahon served his community and his state through service on many councils and boards, serving as co-chair of the National Parks Conservation Association Southeast Regional Council, serving on the County Executives of America Board of Directors, serving as a board member on the Tennessee Statewide Workforce Development Board, serving as a member of the Kiwanis Club of Newport and Morristown, working with the Great Smoky Mountains Regional Greenway System, serving on the Middle East Tennessee Tourism Council, working on the Smoky Mountain Wildlife Project, serving as a member of the Parrottsville Rotarian Club, serving as a mentor for the Tennessee Achieves program, and holding a lifetime membership of both the American Veterans Post 75 and the Disabled American Veterans Post 102. Whereas, through his dedication, Iliff McMahon has earned numerous certifications, awards, and honors, including graduating from the Leadership Cocke County program, as well as the East Tennessee Regional Leadership Program, earning a certification from the University of Tennessee as a certified Tennessee tourism professional in 1998, being recognized as the Outstanding Veteran Employee of the Year by the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development in 2017, being honored by Governor Bill Haslam as one of the 6 Outstanding Veteran Employees of the Year in 2017, and earning a certification from the University of Tennessee as a Tennessee Certified Economic Developer in 2018. Whereas, in addition to the aforementioned roles in public service, Iliff McMahon served with distinction on the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations from 2011 through 2019. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations that we hereby honor and commend Iliff McMahon, Jr. on his retirement from his career with the state of Tennessee and for his valuable contributions throughout 8 years of service on the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations and for his honorable and dedicated service to the good people of this great state.
Mr. Chairman, if Iliff had been here to hear his eulogy, he would be astonished he's still alive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all on the board. I have served on many boards, as we see. When you get into public service, you serve on a lot of boards. I've never served on one that did more noble work or made me feel like the dumbest person in the room on a regular basis than this board. This board and this staff are the best that I've ever seen. So it has been an absolute honor to be able to serve for the last 8 years on this board and get to know you folks, you gentlemen and you ladies. Thank you. That means more to me. I'm thrilled to be retired. I'm having a blast. My wife, Deborah, is here with me, and she's keeping me busy. And I love retirement, and I'm still doing some stuff, consulting. But I'm going to miss you guys. So thank you for taking the time to do this. This means more than you'll ever know. And thank you, the staff, for being so bright, so dedicated for the work that you do, because your work is indeed noble. And I'll end with this. I had a mentor at the Washington Post once. It was a lady that had made it. She was the first one to make it in business world through the glass ceiling back in the 1960s as a manager. And she told me some advice when I first got hired by her in one of her departments. And she brought me in and she said, and I hadn't even found my desk yet. And she looked at me and she said, I'm going to tell you something, and you should reflect back on this when you leave. And I was puzzled because I just got there and, I didn't understand what she was talking about. And she said, when you leave this job and you look back at what you've done, if it's the work that you've missed the most, then you've totally missed the point. So I didn't know what that meant then. I wasn't that bright. But when I left, I realized what she's talking about is the personal relations that you make, the people that you deal with, the people that do the noble work. And I feel blessed to have been here and been part of this. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for a moment of personal privilege, I left, in addition to that resolution and the whereas and wherefores and therefores, I just wanted to say, as a senator representing the furthest in East Tennessee, thank you, because we've worked together a lot. So it's one where you have raised and held that flag high with dignity and character and class. And you represented Tennessee well. And Mr. Chairman and committee also thanked Deborah, his wife, as I was coming in, and said thank you. And I said, interestingly, I said thank you for sharing him with us. And she said, you're welcome to take him back if you'd like. But Deborah, it is a sacrifice on your behalf too, and thank you for that very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments from the chairman. One of them is, I should have never let Iliff write his own resolution. I mean, how long was that? I knew that was a mistake when I asked him to write it, and I can see that it was a mistake. But Iliff and I have been friends for many, many years, and he has certainly served the county and the state with distinction, and I appreciate his friendship and appreciate his service on the commission here. And thank you, Iliff. And let me say that I think after you've been retired for a while and you stay at home with your wife, it'll be the same as I told my wife before I retired, I'm going to spend 2 weeks with you. And I spent about 2 days, and she said, you don't need to ever retire. So,
We're there already.
yeah. Okay, thank you. I think now we are, we're down to staff updates.
Of course, we do have one other commission matter, the election of officers, but before I turn that back over to the chair for that, I'd like to take care of a few staff updates. First of all, we have Senior Research Associate Jennifer Berry and Senior Research Associate Bob Morio, both recently graduated from the State of Tennessee's Boards and Commissions Leadership Academy. And this is a special leadership academy that the state has designed for small agencies like TACIR. So it goes over all the same kinds of leadership fundamentals that are covered in the large departments academies, but it's tailored for small agencies like ours. And both Jennifer and Bob did a fantastic job in the academy. I was very happy to see them graduate this program, and we're looking forward to sending other staff members to it in the future. Also, we're very pleased to welcome 2 summer interns to the TACIR staff this year. We have Briara Murphy and Francisco Mackenplanky. Ms. Murphy and Mr. Mackenplanky are both rising seniors at Vanderbilt University. She's pursuing a degree in public policy, while he's a double major in history and religious studies. Now, Francisco is just getting back into the country and won't actually be joining us on staff until Monday, but may be here to meet you all tomorrow. But we are happy to have Briara here with us today. Briara? And, on a personal note, I would add that Briara was a student in a course I was an adjunct for at Vanderbilt back in the last fall, and I promised her there would be no pop quizzes during the summer internship. So welcome, Briara. Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. If you've noticed, I've tried to hang on to this chairmanship just as long as I can because it's so lucrative. I shouldn't say that. There may be some press in there. They're going to report that how lucrative it actually is. Yeah, that's right. Okay, we are now going to move into the election of chairman and vice chairman, and I am going to open the floor for nominations for chair of TACIR. Yes, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm happy and nomination that Ms. Carter brings a wealth of legal knowledge and public service to this position and will serve the position and TACIR well. I'm happy and honored to nominate him.
Okay. We've got a second and a third. We have nomination of Representative Carter to be the new chair of TACIR. Do we have other nominations?
Move nomination cease.
We have the motion, the nomination cease, and Representative Carter be elected by acclamation. Do we have a second to that? We have a second. Have any discussion on that motion?
Maybe later.
We'll allow you to reserve that till later. Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. All opposed likewise. Representative Carter. Now, Mr. Chairman, here we go. Thank you.
First, let me say I'm humbled and honored by this position. I was first appointed 7 years ago, and we've already talked about the staff and the good work they do. I have absolutely been bowled over at what we send here, the depth of the study that's done. It's absolutely essential. One night when things were a little more boring than they are now, I did some research on this, and apparently we're only one of about 5 or 6. One place said 5 states, one place said 7 states that still have one of these study groups having been created during the Clinton administration. I'm very proud of that. I'm also very proud, in addition to the brilliant staff that we have, their openness to consider all issues. Nothing is predetermined. These people try to get to what is right without regard to politics. And for those who are watching at home, I hope and pray that we always continue that. One of the things I'm most pleased with is the functioning of how we're set up financially. We just can't be tampered with. And I just think that's a great honor. This year, as a member of the House, we did pass, I think, 2 bills that were recommended out of here, which I think is the first time I've seen this. Year before last, we had a very significant bill on some issues that went through. And it was interesting because the young man that came to discuss that bill with me said, "I'm sure you're not familiar with TACIR, but let me tell you about them." And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm not really sure what they do." And so he started telling me why this bill was important. And he said, "They're some of the brightest minds throughout the state." And I said, "Well, now I don't know about that." So finally I had to break down, tell him that I was on it, so it couldn't be some of the brightest minds that they were, but I certainly was not included. But I think our stock rose dramatically in the last session. I hope to continue to do that, and that we consider all aspects of all issues that come before us, and above all, that we put people over politics and that we're fair in everything we do and everything we recommend. And thank you for this honor. I'll do my very best. Thank you. So where are we and where do we go from here?
Next, Mr. Chair, would be a nomination and election of the vice chair.
All right, do I have nominations for the vice chairman? The floor is open. Representative Parkinson.
I nominate Representative Harold Love.
Representative Harold Love, is there a second? There is a second by Senator Robinson. Any other nominations? The floor is open for nominations. I see no other discussion. Is there none? I'm sorry. You're recognized, Senator Lumberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Parliamentary inquiry. I know the chairman has to be an elected member. Is the vice chairman, is there anything in the rules where the vice chairman must not be an elected member?
May I defer that? I don't think so, but I'm not sure.
Per statute and bylaws, there's no restrictions on who can serve as the vice chair. The tradition has been most of the, as far back as I can remember, has been to be a non-General Assembly member of the commission, but I don't think that's a requirement.
All right. With that, other nominations. Mayor Huffman, if there are any.
I was just going to reiterate what Dr. Leopard said, is that generally there's a local government vice chairman, and in the past, generally, it's gone from county to the next one municipal, and then county, municipal, and they alternate. And I know Mayor Waters was vice chairman, but he got bumped up, so he hasn't been vice chairman very long. So I don't know that you flip to a municipal if you hadn't served any longer than you served as vice chairman. But that's generally in the past the way it's been done.
And if I could just elaborate on that, Chair. And that's correct. Vice Chairman Waters, Mayor Waters, took over after Mayor Rowland had to step down for health reasons.
Right.
So he's actually only served a partial term. We had made the decision to go ahead and align the chair and vice chair elections back on the same 2-year cycles, why we are having them both those elections today.
Representative Crawford. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Love, I saw you first there a moment ago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for me, I guess in the spirit of what TACIR represents when we're talking about intergovernmental relations, even though there is no particular statute that speaks to it, I certainly would not want to disrupt the spirit of TACIR with my nomination. So I'm going to, I don't know if I can't withdraw my own, but I guess I could reject the nomination from Representative Parkinson.
Representative Parkinson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to let the junior representative to me know that he can't reject anything from me. But I will withdraw my nomination, Mr. Chair.
For those of you all that don't know Representative Love, he is a man's man and a true gentleman, and exactly what I would expect. Representative Crawford, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to put the name in nomination of Bishop Brooks. Kevin Brooks.
Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second on, I think Bishop is his middle name. I think it's Mayor Kevin. Other nominations? Floor is open. No other nominations. There's been a motion to close. There's been a second. Anyone object? All right, do I hear a motion to accept Mayor Brooks by acclamation? Is there a second? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Welcome, Mayor. Welcome. And we can meet at couches and discuss business. That's in my district. I have to lure him out of the city, but one of his favorite restaurants. All right, where are we on the agenda? If you don't mind to tell me, since you've already got today's pay.
That puts us down to the accomplishments, right? Tab 3.
All right. Tab 3 in your notes, accomplishments. Yeah, tab 3. Melissa, are you first? There you go. One of the things that I'm interested in is with great horror, I discovered one day at Ace Hardware that a lady had watched me on the internet at TACIR. So let's make sure that we let those people at home know what we're doing. So if you don't mind to introduce yourself and what you do. I think there's a lot more people that watch than we realize. So,
all right. Thank you, Chairman
Yes,
Carter. My name is Melissa Brown. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at TACIR. And today I'll be reviewing tab 3, which is the accomplishments for the 2018-19 year. And again, this is behind tab 3 in your docket book. Now, this information will be included in the next biennial report, but there is no formal action required of the Commission today. This is for information purposes only. So if you'll note, beginning on page 1, and just for those of you who were here last year and went through our work program amendments, which we'll go through in a couple of tabs, we had a number of projects assigned, and I'm going to be going through the vast amount of work that you've done over this past year. So since July of 2018, you've published 7 official commission reports. Now, these are outlined in the bullets below, but I'd like to make note that the first report listed there, the Intergovernmental Challenges and Achievements, the biennial report for 2016-17 and 17-18. Item number 5, which is the Tennessee Valley Authority Payment in lieu of Taxes report. And the last report listed there, Building Tennessee's Tomorrow, Anticipating the State's Infrastructure Needs. Those are required by statute and are recurring reports. The other 4 reports listed there, 3 were referred by the General Assembly, and 1 was requested by the House Finance, Ways and Means Committee. And again, at any time, if anyone has any questions, please just let me know. Turning to page 2, I'm going to go over some of the remaining 4 reports in a little more detail. The first related to statutes of limitation. This report was required by Public Chapter 849, Acts of 2018, and it directed the Commission to perform a study on the effectiveness of statutes of limitation on the prosecution of criminal offenses. Now, the study was to include, but not be limited to, information on the statutes of limitation on the prosecution of sexual offenses. And you had 3 main recommendations in your report. The first was that at a minimum, Tennessee law should be amended to clarify a drafting error which had the unintentional effect of shortening the statute of limitation for child rape and aggravated rape offenses if the victim did not report the crime within 3 years. The second recommendation was that Tennessee should eliminate the statute of limitation for Class A and B felony child sexual abuse crimes and consider extending or eliminating the statute of limitation for other child sexual abuse crimes. And finally, you recommended that the state should consider extending or eliminating the statute of limitation for second-degree murder. Now, a copy of this final report was sent to both speakers and members of the General Assembly. And for those of you who are members of the General Assembly and others who follow legislation, you're going to know that some items were passed related to this study, and that will be covered by Nathan Shaver during the presentation of tab 4. Next, you published a report related to affordable health food. Now, this was directed by Public Chapter 795, Acts of 2018. And the Commission was asked to study the benefits and cost of creating a special reserve fund in the State Treasury for the sole purpose of funding grants and loans to encouraging the finance and development of supermarkets, grocery stores, and farmers markets in food deserts. Now, these are places where residents tend to have less nutritious diets and lower and poorer health outcomes than those living in other communities. Now, the report recommended that the state should focus on leveraging the variety of public and private resources that are already available to help communities that really help craft solutions that are tailored to meet their specific needs, because they don't all need the exact same solution. And secondly, excuse me, the state should incorporate consumer education and outreach into the program. And this is to help people, educate them about healthier habits and also encourage them to adopt those healthier habits. Now, this final report was sent to the chairs of the Senate State and Local Government Committee, the House State Government Committee, and the House Local Government Committee. Now, we're at the top of page 3, and the next report that you released was related to governmental property. Now, this report was responding to Public Chapter 693, Acts of 2018, which directed that the study determine the amounts of non-tax producing properties held by state and local governments, as well as recommendations about the highest and best use of properties and ways to make the properties productive. Now, you made several recommendations related to this report, and at the state level, you recommended that all state agencies should submit property use information along with annual real property plans about future property use. So not only how's it being used today, but how might it be used in the future, to the Department of General Services, to the State of Tennessee Real Estate Management Division, which is also known as STREAM. And the state could require that this be part of each agency's budget process for approval of their budget. Tennessee could also require that any state-owned properties that for 10 years had been both unused and there was no planned future use for that property that had been reported to STREAM be either offered back to the prior owners or evaluated for sale as surplus. The next recommendation was the state could require the Tennessee Department of Transportation to report its right-of-way property to STREAM. Now, this would first require TDOT to do an inventory of all of its right-of-way property and determine what is needed and what could be designated as surplus. Along with that recommendation, you recommended that TDOT could actively market any surplus right-of-way property for sale and work with STREAM to integrate surplus TDOT properties into what the Department of General Services does and how they are going to promote the surplus property they identify in other state agencies. Looking at the highest and best use of properties, you recommended that the geographic information systems be integrated into STREAM with state-owned property to provide for a more robust analysis. And that's basically looking at where is it, what is it close to, what could it potentially be used for. Turning to page 4, you suggested the state could list the complete inventory of state-owned real property online. Now, for local governments, you also made a few recommendations, and part of that was the state helping them because not all local governments have the same capabilities related to internet and websites. So the state could assist local governments with management of real property, first by providing legal authority allowing any city or county to establish a land bank. Next, the state could help local governments reach more buyers by allowing local governments to link information about surplus real properties to the state website where the state would advertise the state surplus real property. You also recommended that STREAM could be required to send local officials notice of available state-owned properties in their jurisdictions before offering surplus properties to the public for sale. Now, this is done most of the time as a matter of practice. According to the Department of General Services, this would just make it a requirement that it happen. And finally, the state could offer additional training to county and city officials on the best practices for real property management and to help with promoting the highest and best use of real property owned by local governments. Now, this report was sent to the speakers, chairs of the Senate Finance Ways and Means Committee, the House Finance Ways and Means Committee, and the budget analysis directors for both the Senate and the House. Looking at the bottom of page 4, you released a report on internet sales tax in Tennessee. Now, this responded to a request by House Finance Ways and Means in April 2018. This was during the committee's discussion of House Bill 971 and Senate Bill 1075. The committee had asked the commission to study the revenue sources of cities and counties in Tennessee and the services that cities and counties are required to provide. Now, a working group of local members of the commission suggested that the study initially focus on internet sales tax collection and distribution. Now, this was because of the decision in South Dakota versus Wayfair case, which overturned the Supreme Court's rule that prohibited states from requiring out-of-state sellers to collect sales tax if they had no physical presence in the state. And it also related to the streamlined sales and use tax agreement provisions that were set to become law July 1st of 2019. And again, you had several recommendations related to this one. And I'm just going to tell you, because of the technical aspect with this one, I'm going to follow along in the memo pretty closely. So first recommendation, because it would eliminate an unfair tax advantage for some out-of-state sellers, it would not apply retroactively, and it includes a safe harbor for those who transact only limited business in the state. The General Assembly should allow the Department of Revenue to enforce Rule 129, which would require out-of-state sellers with no physical presence in the state who had sales of more than $500,000 in Tennessee to collect and remit sales tax. And you suggested that the state should also consider lowering this threshold in the future. Next, streamlining provisions changing Tennessee from origin-based to destination-based for intrastate sales, which is when the buyer and seller are both within Tennessee, should not be allowed to take effect. And this will be to avoid complicating sales tax collection for in-state sellers and to avoid shifting revenue away from jurisdictions where infrastructure investments have already been made to support retail locations. Tennessee should continue to distribute local option sales tax revenue from interstate sales to the jurisdiction where the sale originated, not the delivery destination of the item. Next, streamlining provisions limiting the single article cap to certain items should not be allowed to take effect, and Tennessee should retain its single article sales tax cap for all sales. Next, the state could continue to offer sellers the option of paying the destination rate or the uniform rate, but in either case, the way the revenue is distributed should be based on the destination of sales. And the state may also want to consider increasing the uniform rate to the maximum allowable local rate. And finally, because of the streamlining provisions that are already in effect in Tennessee, and it's unlikely that any of these provisions would be necessary for Tennessee to withstand any constitutional challenge if it were allowed to allow Rule 129 to go into effect. Unlike the provisions that we discussed above about the single article cap, in-state deliveries, and eliminating the uniform rate, the Commission took no position on whether the other provisions should become effective. Now, a copy of the final report was sent to both speakers and all members of the General Assembly. Turning to page 6, there was also one staff update that was published, and this was related to Tennessee's election security. This was at the request of Senator Nicely, who asked that the Commission update the staff report from 2007, Trust But Verify, Increasing Voter Confidence in Election Results. 2 specific items were requested to be researched. One is the most cost-effective and efficient voter-verified paper audit trail, known as VPAT, options for Tennessee County, and 2, the opportunities to offset VPAT cost with the use of secure electronic transfer. Now, in the 2007 report, staff had recommended that Tennessee implement a VPAT audit trail statewide within a reasonable amount of time, and adopt a VPAT that could be counted by hand as well as by machine, and finally adopt a standard for VPAT that would meet federal guidelines that were under consideration at that time. Now, TACIR staff continues to support these recommendations and further recommends that county officials who don't want to replace their non-VPAT machines to consider adding printers when they are able to machines to make them VPAT capable. And rather than relying on paper voter registration applications, staff encourages the state to continue implementing electronic voter registration processes. Moving down the page on page 6, staff provided 2 presentations over the past year. Both of these were by Director I'm sorry?
You're recognized, Senator Yeager.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
If I could call your attention to page 6 there, the midway down where it says TACIR staff. Madam, TACIR staff continues to support these recommendations. With the reference to TACIR staff, does that imply that the TACIR at some time has taken a position on this issue? Or is that a reference to the staff?
Cliff, you want to address the difference between a commission report and a staff report?
Director Lepard, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Senator, the original report that Senator Nicely asked us to update was a staff report as well. So it did not have, it was not an official position of the commission. The commission has not taken an official position on this, so we wanted to make it clear when we did an update of it that it was a staff update of a staff report. So it's not an official commission position. And in all TACIR reports, say at the front of the report, whether they're delineate the difference between an official commission report and a staff report. The majority of the reports we produce, of course, are commission reports.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the explanation. I did not know that, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, moving down to presentations made by staff over the past year. Each of these was made by Director Lippard. The first one was to the Southeastern Conference of Public Administration, entitled Regional Collaboration, What Works? An Exploration of Mandated and Voluntary Collaboration Among Tennessee Local Governments. And the second was related to institutional integrity, and this was to the State of Tennessee Boards and Commissions Academy. Turning to page 7, staff participated in one panel discussion. Senior Research Associate Jennifer Berry represented TACIR at the Tennessee Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights. The panel was entitled Tennessee Court Fees and Taxes, Funding the Courts Fairly, to the panel on legal financial obligations. Staff served on one task force. Again, this was Senior Research Associate Jennifer Berry and Senior Policy Consultant Lanice Patrick. Worked with Tennessee's H2O Technical Working Group, the Legal Framework Working Group, and served as liaisons between the Technical Working Group and the Infrastructure Working Group. Again, over the past year, staff responded to requests for information from the General Assembly, legislative committees, the public, state agencies, lobbyists, and the media. Staff administered 10 contracts over the past year. 9 of these are with the development districts that support the collection of data related to the Public Infrastructure Needs Inventory, and the second is a contract with Middle Tennessee State University, the Economic Indicators website. On page 7, the bottom part, it just starts to separate the reports we've just covered by policy area. Turning to page 8, looking under Education Finance, Michael Mount completed the fiscal year 2019-20 fiscal capacity model. It has already been sent to the State Board of Education and State Department of Education for use in next year's BEP calculations. I wanted to call your attention to the infrastructure report and just highlight the number of contributors to the information that goes into that report. The 9 development districts work with us, along with contacting 141 school systems, 95 counties, 345 municipalities, and 461 other entities. And those are typically subgroups of the larger groups I just named. Other research, that's just where the reports don't fall into one of our statutorily mandated categories that we have. And then finally on page 9, under using technology for public information, we continue to publish all of our reports on the website. We have subject area specific portions of the website related to TVA, infrastructure, growth policy, education. We continue to update our county profiles, continue to publish information related to tracking Tennessee's economy, and we also notify through social media of upcoming meetings, significant events, issues of that nature. And if anyone has any questions, I'm glad to answer them.
Questions for Ms. Brown, our Executive Director. Questions? Comments? Thank you.
All right.
Doesn't appear to be any. Next, our legislative update. Mr. Nathan Shaver, he's our Senior Research Associate. Mr. Shaver.
Thank you, Chairman Carter. So I'll now be presenting the Commission's legislative update for the 2019 session of the General Assembly that adjourned earlier this month. So the memo on this is under tab 4 in the docket books. The memo covers 2 things. The first is the bills that were the bills that were passed or considered this session that dealt with issues that have been studied by this commission over the last few years. And second, it discusses the new bills that were sent to TACIR to study this session. So first I'll go over the bills related to the past TACIR studies, and then I'll pivot to talk about the General Assembly's requests for new studies. So starting first with the issue of criminal statutes of limitations, which was the focus of the Commission's December 2018 report. So several bills were filed this session that were related to this report, including 2 bills that became law. So one of the bills that became law was Public Chapter 499, Acts of 2019, which is similar to the Commission's recommendation to eliminate the statutes of limitations for all Class A and B felony child sexual abuse crimes, and to also consider extending or eliminating the statute of limitation for other child sexual abuse crimes. So specifically, the new law eliminates the criminal statutes of limitations for all felony child sex crimes committed against victims less than 13 years of age, and for felony child sex crimes committed against victims between the ages of 13 to 17 years of age. The new law eliminates the statutes of limitations if the victim reports the crime to another person prior to the victim attaining 23 years of age. For those victims between the ages of 13 to 17 years old, if the aforementioned reporting requirement is not met, for prosecution to be brought more than 25 years after the victim reaches 18 years of age, the prosecution must offer admissible and credible evidence corroborating the allegations or similar acts by the defendant. Also, the Commission's report recommends the new law also corrects the drafting error in state statute that had the unintentional effect of shortening the statute of limitations for child rape and aggravated child rape in certain circumstances. So following another one of the recommendations from the Commission's report, the General Assembly also passed Public Chapter 410, Acts of 2019, which extends the statute of limitation for prosecution of second-degree murder from 15 years from the offense to any time after the offense is committed. So next, turning to the issue of internet sales tax collection and distribution, which was the issue discussed in the Commission's February 2019 interim report. The General Assembly passed 3 bills related to this report, and Michael Mount, who is the lead researcher on this study, will briefly touch on this topic later and can answer some of the more specific questions if you have those. So the first law is Public Chapter 491, Acts of 2019, which is similar in effect to the Commission's recommendations. The bill eliminates a uniform statewide local option sales tax rate of 2.25% for out-of-state sellers with no physical presence in the state. It bases the distribution of local revenue received by the Department of Revenue from such out-of-state sellers on the destination of sales. And it provides for an alternative distribution method if the department is unable to determine the proper distribution. So just to be clear, the Commission did not explicitly recommend the elimination of the uniform rate, but the Commission recommended that the state could continue to offer sellers the option of paying the destination rate or the uniform rate, but in either case, distribution of the revenue should be based on the destination of the sales, which is what the new law does. The bill also follows the Commission's recommendation to retain origin-based sourcing for intrastate sales when the state's streamlined sales tax provisions of Public Chapter 602 Acts of 2007 becomes effective. So the General Assembly passed 2 additional laws related to this study on internet sales tax. So consistent with the Commission's recommendation to retain the single article sales tax cap, the General Assembly passed Public Chapter 157 Acts of 2019 to delay until 2021 the implementation of the streamlined sales tax provisions of Public Chapter 602 Acts of 2007, including a provision that would have eliminated the single article sales tax cap. And following the Commission's recommendation, the General Assembly passed Public Chapter 429, Acts of 2019, to enable the Department of Revenue to enforce Rule 129, which is the rule that requires out-of-state sellers with no physical presence in the state with sales of more than $500,000 in Tennessee to collect and remit sales tax. So moving to the next topic of the professional privilege tax, which was the issue discussed in the Commission's December 2016 report, several bills were filed regarding this tax, including one that became law this last session. Public Chapter 478, Acts of 2019, which was passed by the General Assembly and effective May 2020, will eliminate the $400 annual professional privilege tax for 15 of the 22 professions that are currently required to pay this tax. So the new law is estimated to cut taxes by over $22 million and will exempt over 56,000 individuals from paying this tax. And while the Commission's report did not make a specific recommendation on whether or not the professional privilege tax should be eliminated, it did note that eliminating the tax entirely for all professions would cost the state an estimated $88 million per year. It also noted that over the years, legislators and representatives of various professions have argued that Tennessee's professional privilege tax is not fair, saying that some of those professions that are not taxed have greater incomes than those that are taxed, that incomes of professionals vary significantly within the tax professions, and that those in professions earning lower salaries have to pay the same amount as those earning more. So next up is the Healthy Workplace Act. So back in 2014, if you'll recall, Tennessee adopted an anti-bullying statute known as the Healthy Workplace Act, which directed this commission to create a model policy for the use of public employers. The act provides that employers that adopt an anti-bullying policy that conforms to the law will be immune from lawsuits alleging negligent or intentional infliction of mental anguish caused by the abusive conduct of employees. So commission staff convened a working group with other agencies and drafted a model policy that included the required components outlined in the law, but ultimately the commission chose not to adopt that or any other model policy. So Public Chapter 214, Acts of 2019, extends the definition of employer in the act to also include private employers. The new law makes it clear that it does not create a cause of action that can be taken against an employer for not adopting a policy. So next up is broadband internet access, which was discussed in the Commission's 2017 broadband report. Several bills were filed this session related to the report, with one becoming law. The General Assembly passed Public Chapter 501, Acts of 2019, which exempts from state and local sales tax the installation or lease of fiber optic cable after it has been attached to a utility pole, building, or other structure, or installed underground. So the bill also deletes the current credit, which the TACIR report had previously recommended, against franchise and excise tax liability equal to 6% of the purchase price of qualified broadband internet access equipment. So moving on to the next topic of annexation and land use. which were topics of TACIR reports from back in 2015. So at least 3 bills were considered related to TACIR reports, with one becoming law this last session. Public Chapter 408, Acts of 2019, passed and specified that those who reside in or own property in the territory proposed for annexation, rather than just residents of a territory proposed for annexation, may vote in the annexation referendum. So allowing non-resident landowners to vote in annexation referendums was an idea that was discussed in the 2015 annexation report, but not specifically recommended. So and finally, the issue of court fees and taxes in Tennessee, which was the issue discussed back in January 2017 in a commission report. So based on the commission's recommendation, a bill was filed but did not pass that would have created a court fee and advisory council that would make recommendations concerning pending legislation proposing any new litigation tax or fee on civil or criminal cases to the members of the General Assembly. So now I'll pivot to the next part of this presentation, where I'll briefly discuss the General Assembly's request for new TACIR studies. In 2019, the General Assembly requested 4 new TACIR studies. And one of these studies is directed by a public chapter. 2 of them are requested by legislative committees, and one is requested from a letter from Senator Dickerson. So I'll briefly go over the new study requests. The first TACIR study is directed by Public Chapter 407, Acts of 2019. That was sponsored by Senator Roberts and Representative Smith. And this is known as the Tennessee Right to Shop Act. So this new law requires insurers to provide information that enables the insured to shop around for the best price on medical services and authorizes insurers to offer incentive programs to reward the insured for choosing the lower cost service. The type of program authorized by the bill are commonly referred to as right to shop programs, which are designed to address rising healthcare costs by encouraging the insured to switch to the lower cost service. The new law also specifically directs TACIR to perform a study of any cost savings realized by enrollees with health plans, including private health plans and state-funded health plans in states that have already adopted right to shop legislation or programs. The new law provides that the study shall include, at a minimum, an examination of such savings realized by programs in Maine, New Hampshire, Florida, Arizona, and Kentucky. And it requires TACIR to report its findings to the General Assembly no later than December 2020. So the second TACIR study request comes from Senate Bill 1114 by Yarborough and House Bill 1120 by Freeman, which did not pass but would have created a state government task force on extreme weather, natural catastrophes, and community resilience, which could be defined as the ability to prepare for, recover from, and more successfully adapt to adverse events. The proposed 24-member task force would have largely been comprised of representatives of government agencies that are in some way related to community resilience. As amended, the bill would have required the proposed task force to submit a report of its findings and recommendations to the Tennessee General Assembly by July 1st of 2020. However, during discussion on the bill in the Tennessee General Assembly's House State Committee, Representative Hicks suggested that in lieu of creating this 24-member task force to produce a report and recommendations, it would be more efficient to have TACIR study the issue, meet with the relevant government agencies and stakeholders, and produce a report with recommendations. Later, Representative Hawk made a motion which passed directing the commission to study the issues in the bill. And in the Senate, Senator Yarborough made a motion which passed in the State and Local Government Committee, also directing the commission to study the issues of the bill. So the third TACIR study request for this session comes from Senate Bill 600 by Jackson and House Bill 635 by Travis, which deals with the local government procurement process. So as you know, under current law, local governments may receive bids, proposals, and other offers online. This bill would have required, instead of allowing local governments to provide the option for vendors to submit bids, proposals, and other offers online. The bill, which did not pass, would have exempted local governments that are currently without access to high-speed internet or a computer from these requirements until such time that access to high-speed internet or computers becomes available. So during discussion of the bill in committees, representatives of local governments voiced their opposition to requiring instead of allowing local governments to accept bids online. In the House Local Government Committee, Representative Travis, the bill's sponsor, made a motion which passed to send the bill to TACIR for additional study. The fourth and final TACIR study request comes from Senator Dickerson, who introduced Senate Joint Resolution 344, which would have directed TACIR to study problems stemming from illegal waste tire dumps in Tennessee. This legislation was referred to the Senate Energy, Ag, and Natural Resources Committee, but the General Assembly adjourned without taking up the bill. Senator Dickerson, with support from Chairman Sutherland, sent a letter on May 5th to formally request that TACIR take up this study. The letter from Senator Dickerson requests that the study focus on the following topics: the health risk of illegal waste tire dumps, dangers of the igniting and burning of illegal waste tire dumps, current recycling methods for waste tires, new recycling alternatives for waste tires, new preventative strategies for the practice of illegal waste tire dumping, and incentives for recycling through the state and local programs. So that concludes my presentation on the legislative update. And I'm happy to answer any questions. If there's no more, Deputy Director Melissa Brown will be discussing the work program amendments where you'll vote on the new study requests.
I think we have at least one or two questions. I saw Representative Crawford first, and Mayor, we'll be back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is just personal knowledge. Do we allow TACIR to do studies that have been requested by individual senators or representatives, or do they not have to come from one of the committees?
I think, well, Dr. Lepard, do you want to address that? Thank you for picking that up.
So, Representative Crawford, it's up to the commission, actually. It's the will of the commission. We attempted to somewhat formalize the process several years ago under past Chairman Norris, where we have a preference for studies that are obviously sent to us by public chapter or through a joint resolution. The second priority would be studies that are sent to us by committees of both chambers. And then beyond that would be, the next priority would be studies requested either by individual legislators or by members of the commission itself, but those are subject to the vote of the commission. And we've really pretty much based our decision, the members in the past have based their decision on whether to approve those studies or not based on the available resources and whether there's the capacity to complete the reports in the time requested. In some instances, we've agreed to do the reports, but on a little bit longer timeline than originally requested. And Melissa's getting ready to go through the work program now and the status of current reports and studies that we've been requested to do and to take the vote on whether or not you as a commission wish to pursue those. There is a handout in the front of each of the members' docket book that kind of shows the current workload over the next several quarters, distributed, assuming that we were to be given all these studies, that you were to vote for us to pursue all of these studies. And I would say the short answer is we have the capacity to do the studies, but of course, whenever we agree to do something that's a little bit long-term, that does reduce our future capacity to do studies that may be requested next session.
Follow-up, Representative Crawford?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern would be that we're setting a dangerous precedent to be able to, just request these studies and overload the necessary studies that we need, and these things are not cheap. So I guess my follow-up question would be, have we ever done that before? We have?
Yes, we have.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative McDonald. I'm sorry, Mayor McDonald.
Thank you.
Didn't mean to demote you. Sorry. My humble apologies.
No, thank you. Nathan,
Yes,
the community resilience asked for a deadline when it was being thought of as a bill, and then when it was sent to us, I don't notice a particular deadline. Am I missing something, or is that true?
That's correct. There's not a deadline for when the TACIR study should be provided.
All right.
That's correct.
And that's also true for online bidding and local?
Do you want to answer that, Dr. Lippert? There's no, as far as I know, there's no due date set when the study was requested specifically.
I would add, though, that during the discussion in committee, when that study was sent to us, the discussion was a summer study so that they could perhaps take action on it next year, which I always take that to mean a January 1st deadline, if not in writing, at least in intent.
So that's true for both of them?
Not on the community resilience. I actually have spoken with both of the sponsors of the original legislation and explained, our current workload. And I don't think I had, Senator Yarborough can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I made any promises. I told them that I thought based on current workload, we could probably work around the deadline set in the original bill, but they understand that we need some flexibility on that as other work.
All right, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am. Mayor?
Yes, I have a question about the Tennessee Right to Shop Act. I know we're encouraging in there individuals to shop for lower cost services, but is there an education component? Because we don't want to, diminish their quality of care.
That's a great question. I don't know if there is currently, but I can check and get back with you about that.
I would think that would be very, very important because, and especially to a lot of people who are going to look at the dollar and are not comparing what services they're going to get. They'll pay less, but they may not get the quality.
In my understanding is right now that the law would authorize the providers to set up an online system or folks who go online and check what the prices are. But the educational component, I'm not sure about. I'll check and get back.
I think that their online is convenient. Not everybody will be able to do that, but also there should be an opportunity for them to come in and have a one-on-one counseling kind of. So, thank you.
Sure. Other questions or comments, members? Yes, sir. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 5, under the TACIR of Annexation and Land Uses, although it doesn't, Mr. Chairman, my question is more about, and when Public Chapter 1109 was implemented way back in the late 99, 98, there was a 20-year period of time. Did any of that discussion happen to come up into this at all, that when that would be revisited?
If I might answer that, since I carried the bill and it was not successful, it was taken off notice at the request of one of your persons. We didn't get anywhere with the bill. Just essentially after it was filed, I was asked to take it off notice and did so. But we had not planned to discuss any 1101 or the 20-year. It was solely a bill that essentially said that no city may annex extraterritorially if the cost of doing so in part or in full inures to the county's responsibility. That if so, then the county must approve that. That's what that entire bill was limited to. It was a very short, sweet, simple bill, but it was taken off notice at the request of the person that brought it to me.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I think we're now to our Executive Director, Ms. Brown. Are you back with us?
I am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I get promoted, I'm Melissa Brown, Deputy Executive Director. I don't want to get in trouble with Dr. Lippert up there. I certainly don't want his responsibilities right now. Turning to tab 5, we're going to discuss the work program amendment and the new research plans. Now, Nathan's done a great job discussing the 4 bills that are up for consideration. I do want to talk to you a little bit about the way this tab is set up. Of course, the memo was first, and the first thing we're going to do is cover the existing projects that are on the work program, and then we'll be discussing each of the amendments. But behind that, for each of the bills that we may be studying, there's a tab A through D. And if you'll turn to tab A just for a moment, a research plan has been developed for each of the 4 bills that you may decide to take up and add to the work program for next year. For those of you who have not seen this format before, at the top of the document is a name of the project and then the assigned staff who will be doing the work on the study. Below that, you'll see that Cliff and I have approved this research plan. And of course, the more you get into research, the more you may add steps to what we're going to be looking at. Then there's the purpose and the background of the study, and of course, to even be able to do a research plan, you have to do a little research. So part of what the staff has already done is watched any video related to the bill going through the legislative process this year, any testimony from experts, questions that arose, talking to bill sponsors, and doing as much quick research as they can to understand the issue, how prevalent it is, and what may or may not be happening in other states. And then the rest of it is outlined according to our 8-step research process that we adopted several years ago. And each of the headings in the back of the research plan, so defining the problem, assembling evidence, those outline the 8 steps we use to go through our research. At the back of the research plan, someone mentioned due dates. There is a timeline, a tentative timeline for each of the projects and its completion. And then behind that is a copy of the legislation or the bill that we have been requested to study. So going back to the first page of the memo, I want to briefly, well, like I said earlier, you had a lot of projects.
Mayor?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Just, they reference this sheet that we have.
Right.
It appears that these items are also on this sheet already. Is that correct?
It is, and it's to show what would happen with the workload if you adopted each of the 4 items that are up for consideration today.
Thank you.
Just so you would see what would happen
Thank
to
you.
staffing. Okay.
Any other questions while we have Ms. Brown paused? All right.
Okay, all right, thank you. Status of existing work program projects. The first is the annual Public Infrastructure Needs Report. You approved this at the January 2019 meeting. Staff is simultaneously gathering and checking survey data to prepare for next year's report. You approved this year's report again at the January 2019 meeting, along with the TVA Pilot Annual Report. Now, we'll present the annual update for your approval at the January 2020 meeting to meet the statutory deadline of February 28th, 2020. Next is the Fiscal Capacity Index, and as I mentioned earlier, this year's index has already been calculated and transmitted to the Department of Education and the State Board of Education for use in next year's BEP calculations and distribution. Michael Mount will be updating you on this year's calculations at the very next tab, so you'll hear that presentation today. Cord cutting and local government revenues. This was requested by commission members at the January 2018 meeting. We'll present the draft report for your review and comment at this meeting. That will be done by Dr. Owen, and the draft report is behind tab 9. A final report will be presented at your summer meeting. Going on to page 2, this relates, next report relates to municipal elections. House Local Government Subcommittee and the Senate State and Local Government Committee requested the Commission study and research the effects of requiring municipalities in Tennessee to change the date of their municipal elections to coincide with the August or November general elections. Now, the draft report will be presented for your review and comment at this meeting by Senior Research Associate Jennifer Berry. The final report will be at the fall meeting, and the draft for that report is behind tab 10. Public Chapter 952, Acts of 2018, asked the Commission to study the potential overall effects of creating a franchise and excise tax credit for shippers with pickups or deliveries originating in or destined to any county having a population over 900,000 according to the 2010 federal census or any subsequent census. You're going to hear the draft report for your review and comment at this meeting. Today, it's behind tab 7. Tyler Carpenter will be presenting that report, and a final report at your summer meeting. Public Chapter 827, Acts of 2018, directed the Commission to study and prepare a report on global positioning system monitoring as a condition of bail for certain domestic abuse, sexual assault, and stalking offenses. Now, a draft report will be presented for your review and comment at the summer 2019 meeting, and a final report at the fall 2019 meeting. Public Chapter 819, Acts of 2018, directs the Commission to study the Act's effect on the deployment of broadband and the Act's fiscal effect on local governments and identify best practices from the perspective of stakeholders and from a review of other states. Identify opportunities to advance other policy goals supported by deployment of facilities providing wireless broadband, specifically opportunities to advance the quality of transportation in Tennessee by utilizing technological applications, sometimes referred to as smart transportation applications, and make any recommendations, changes to the law based on the findings of the study. The draft report is to be presented for your review and comment no later than August 2020. Public Chapter 228, Acts of 2017, asked the Commission to update its January 2017 report on broadband internet deployment, availability, and adoption in Tennessee. The final report for that is due January 15, 2021. Next is Senate Joint Resolution 593. It directed the Commission to study the overall effects of public education relative to laws and regulations related to the sharing of resources among school districts located in the same county, and the effect of the operation within a county of municipal or special school districts in addition to the county system. Now, the draft report is to be presented for your review and comment at the fall 2019 meeting. And finally, on the current work program is House Bill 971 by Sargent and Senate Bill 1071 by Watson, regarding state share taxes and local services. Now, this was referred to the Commission by the House Finance Ways and Means Committee to address 4 questions. What are the duties of cities? What are the duties of counties? What are the funds that go from the state to cities to meet these obligations and comply with the law? And what funds go from the state to counties to comply with the law? Now, this project has been divided into interim reports. The first was the Internet Sales Tax Report, which was published in February 2019. The second is education funding and services, and 3 is all other revenue and services. Now, the education funding and services interim draft will be presented at the fall meeting, and the draft for the rest of the study will be presented at the spring 2020 meeting. Now, that's an update of the current projects on the work program. So now we're up to considering the 4 amendments for your consideration in addition to this year's work program, and Nathan's gone into detail on each one of these. For those of you who have gone through this process before, the memo is a little different than in past years. In past years, we grouped bills, like all those required by public chapter, were under one amendment. Now each potential study has its own amendment, so there'll be 4 votes. So the first amendment would add the study required by now public chapter 407 related to the healthcare shopping incentive plan. So, Chairman, however you want to approach voting on these.
Suggestions? What's the pleasure of the committee?
I would move Amendment 1.
All right. Amendment 1 has been moved. Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor on Amendment 1 say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Bill passes.
Okay, the next is Amendment 2, which is the study related to extreme weather, natural catastrophes, and community resilience. That's Senate Bill 1114 by Yarborough and House Bill 1120 by Freeman. That's at the bottom of page 3 of the memo.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. We have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, passes.
Page 4 of the memo, we can look at Amendment 3, which is the adding the study of Senate Bill 600 by Jackson and House Bill 635 by Travis related to the online bidding to provide goods and services to local governments.
Is there a second? We have a motion. Do we have a second? All in favor of adopting and studying Amendment 3, say aye. 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 Any opposed? All right, accepted.
And finally, Amendment 4, which relates to Senate Joint Resolution 344 by Dickerson related to illegal tire dumps.
All right. May I have a moment of personal privilege here? I'm extremely concerned about allowing an individual representative or senator to send us something. I just know over where I am, we're going to be covered up with these requests. I certainly have the greatest respect for Senator Dickerson and know that he only sends good stuff. But my concern is, from my experience this past year, our House operates under the rule that unless you have a committee vote or a House vote accompanied by a Senate committee vote, then it doesn't come to us. And I think that's very protective of us, and it keeps people from wanting to, who have bills that simply don't deserve consideration, to simply moving their bill to TACIR so that they can state that it's being further studied and all that. That's very concerning to me. Other comments? I saw you first, Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I was the House sponsor on this particular piece of legislation. I do understand the concerns that we have for an individual member just sending a bill to TACIR. Sometimes, so Mr. Chairman, in the committee system, the TACIR recommendation becomes the only salvation you have for your legislation because things get jumbled up. And hopefully things will change so that more consideration will be given. But I know that particularly, I had a food desert bill that thankfully got to TACIR, but that was the only way that it could even be heard was to get it here because it was not getting any traction at all in the committee, even to be heard. But for a vote to send it here, got here. So I understand your concern about just having a letter request, but as you know, the fast pace we move in also in our committee system, sometimes, particularly with the ambiguity of first and second hearing of a bill, you show up, that's one hearing, and you didn't show up, but they put your bill on calendar anyway, and that was the second hearing, and then all of a sudden your bill goes back to the clerk's office. It happened to me one time where I didn't even put my bill on notice, and it got heard in a committee, and I wasn't there, and that was the first hearing. And I showed up again. I said, well, how can my bill be heard when I didn't put it on notice? And I'm just listing out the problems in the committee system for legislators with the elimination of committee roles and requests you have to have a bill heard 2 weeks from now, those sort of things. And so I would hope that if we are going to address these concerns about a legislator by letter requesting TACIR study, that we also address the underlying symptom or the underlying problem, not just the symptom, because if the committee system, I dare say, is broken or at least malfunctioning, then a legislator who has an idea that needs to be studied or fleshed out may only have their own recourse to send a letter to TACIR looking for some relief because summer studies don't, I won't say don't, but summer studies sometimes don't materialize. The summer study is not a study. It's just a kinder way of members to put your bill off and just to be nice about it. And so I hope that you consider, members will consider also, I know our local government officials, you may not experience this angst that I've experienced, but I have experienced in a committee system where you're trying to get a study done and you're trying to bring some research forward to add weight to your particular legislation, and getting a first and a second on a motion to have your bill heard to get it recommended to TACIR is a struggle. So if you can't get a motion and a second, and then you might get it voted down. I had someone, a member voted against the bill and came and told me, I said, we're doing too many studies. I don't want you to take it personal, Representative Love, but you're doing too many studies. That's okay. The next vote, he voted for a study. And I said, we're doing too many studies, per your words. And so I'm just saying, as we look at all of the things that go on, this has become a bit of a refuge for some members to get things really looked at. And again, the process to get the motion, the second, and a favorable vote in the committee is not as easy as it may sound or seem. That's all I want to say, Mr. Chairman.
All right. If I could, just for a personal comment, Representative Crawford was out. Representative Crawford, our discussion is where are we on allowing one member to unilaterally send a study to us? You had stepped out. I know you had to take an important call, so I wanted to make sure you had comments on that earlier just to bring you up to speed. And I raised that issue again. Senator Yarbrough.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just I sort of share both these concerns, both the one expressed by the chair and but recognize exactly where Representative Love is coming from as well. And, you know, I think that there certainly should be and can be a difference in the way that we treat a request that comes from a committee and one that simply comes from a legislator. I mean, I think that most of the time that I've served on this commission, when something comes either from the full General Assembly or from a committee, or especially two committees, one from each chamber, I think the default assumption is that assume that we will do that work. And when it comes to an individual legislator, I don't think that assumption should hold in the same way. I don't think that, because I think the chair is correct that we don't want this commission and the staff to become subject to, you know, one letter writing representative who requests 18 studies. But I don't think that means that we should necessarily dismiss those requests just because they are made by an individual. I think you know, when we have those, I think I guess I would put forward that it probably makes sense for us to make a motion second and have a discussion about whether or not that's a study that we think is worth doing, one that is within the resources of the commission and its staff, and will actually advance the ball. But and I don't know if that's a viable suggestion, but to me that's how I remember treating these, is that I think we should give these requests our attention. We should pay attention to them. I don't think they should have a default either way, either to accept them or decline them. But I think it's something that we can. But I also don't think we should disqualify them just simply because they're brought by a single representative rather than a committee.
Thanks, Senator. Representative Parkinson, I had you on the list prior to him, called him by mistake ahead of you. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm used to it. It's all good. I'm just kidding. Just kidding, Mr. Chair. You know, TACIR has two problems, two real problems. The first problem is they're good. The second problem is they're thorough, which puts TACIR in high demand, right? But at the end of the day, you know, it's the body that has the decision-making power as to whether or not we look at an issue or not at the end of the day, and that's what we're here for. Looking at this issue, the problem of illegal dumping of tires is a real serious problem, especially in urban areas. Now, when you factor in trying to get a TACIR study approved, and you're a legislator from an urban area, the odds are real slim, and that's a fact in our legislature, and we have to factor that in, you know, as we're you know, creating the policy on how policies are going to be heard in this body, you know. But I can guarantee you, if you ask any of the mayors of you know, most of our you know, mid to large cities in Tennessee, you're gonna find that this is a real issue. And I'm going out on a limb saying that, knowing that Mayor McDonald, and I have never talked to him about this, but I know in Shelby County this is a real issue. This is a real serious issue, and so, you know, I hope that we will look at these requests based on the merit of the issue and make decisions from there, because our job is to you know, work on policy and come up with, you know, solutions that may not have been addressed in the legislature possibly, and work on those things. But we need this. We need TACIR or somebody to take a real serious look at this issue and help us come up with some solutions that will be beneficial, honestly, to the largest bodies of our populace in our state. And so, and I'm sure it's happening in some of the rural communities too, but it's pervasive in our urban communities, and right now there are no real solutions out there. I mean, there's been everything from tire buyback programs that you only have so many resources and so much money that you can spend on buying them back and having the community pick them up, and but we need to look at this, and I hope that if we're going to vote on this, Mr. Chair, I hope that the body will vote to adopt this and take a look at this, because we really need this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Parkinson. I've got you next, Representative Crawford. Mayor Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree on that. From the rural standpoint, the tires are a real problem. Our Class 3, 4 landfill, we had to raise prices this year because of the losses we were taking. Well, what that's done, it's created more illegal dumps. We're trying to, the rural West Tennessee mayors are trying to work with TDEC to get something done about this, and we're having discussion this summer about that. So this is a real problem, not only to the urban areas, but to the rural areas. And we're finding our ditches are being filled with tires in Henry County. So it is a significant issue in the smaller communities also. Thank you for your points. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lumberg. I'm sorry. I had a flashback. Senator Lumberg.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with most everything here, except that I don't want this body to be something that fixes the committee system in the legislature. But I like the discussion we're having. That is what, in my mind, we do. I think if you want a TACIR study, the first thing is you pass a bill. The second thing, it seems, you pass a joint resolution. And Cliff, I hope you, as people ask, you're responding that if you're just sending a letter, I don't want to say crapshoot, but it's a best of luck, it may or may not happen. But I think that's what we're here for as a body, to talk about what we should look at and if it has statewide implications and if it merits it. And clearly from this discussion it does. And with that, I will move that we adopt Amendment 4.
Could we get Representative Crawford before we do that? I had him on the list.
My apologies. I withdraw my motion.
All right. Representative Crawford, your comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And when I asked the question earlier, you will remember that I prefaced this by wanting to know just for my personal self, because I was not familiar with how this system has worked in the past. And I was told that this is not unusual, that we've done that before. But being a chairman of a committee in the House, I think that if a study is warranted, and that's what the representative or senator wants to do, I don't know of any committee chairmen that would not work with those individuals I think the study should stand on its own merit, and if it's good, I think the committee chairmen would work with them to get that done. So I kind of fall back to Senator Yarborough and what he said. Maybe we ought to look at it from a perspective of, if it comes as a single person, it kind of goes on the list. We look at the merit of that study as TACIR, and we decide whether we want to take that up or not. But if it comes to us from a committee or other way like that, then it should have priority. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Representative Crawford. Other questions or comments? We'll go back to Senator Lumberg for his motion. There's a motion and a second. All in favor of adopting Amendment Number 4 for study on illegal tire dumps, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions before our executive director leaves on something? Okay. All right. Mr. Mount, our senior research associate, on fiscal capacity for fiscal year 2019 and 20. I had a friend call me today saying he'd been appointed to the Fiscal Review Committee and he didn't know what to expect. I told him to make sure and be extremely careful in what he said. I think he was pronouncing it incorrectly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioners, my name is Michael Mount, and I'll be giving our annual update on fiscal capacity, which can be found on tab 6. If you want to follow along with the presentation, it's after the memo, the fiscal capacity user's guide, and the tables. And before I begin on fiscal capacity, I'll start by briefly mentioning the BEP. The BEP is the state's education funding formula. It's used to determine the amount needed by each school system to fund education. The BEP has 4 components, and you can see them listed there under the second item.
Like magic.
And each has a local share and a state share. These shares are for the state overall, but for instance, the overall local share for the non-classroom cost is 50% local, 50% state. But the percentage for a county and its school systems will be different, and that depends on its fiscal capacity. Fiscal capacity allocates the local share among the counties, and the state makes up the difference between that and the total cost of the BEP for each school system. To calculate fiscal capacity, we take the results of TACIR's model and Sieber's model and average the two together. Fiscal capacity is a measure of a county's ability to pay.
Mr. Mount, could I interrupt just a minute? Mayor Waters, you're recognized.
Yes. Just a quick question on the item number 2. It says local share and state share. Are those 4 items, is that averages across the state? Is that where those percentages come from?
These percentages are for the state overall, and so an individual county's percentage will be different, and that difference will be based on fiscal capacity.
On the BEP, but this is an average. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it an average, it's just the state's overall share between the state share and the local match.
What would be the difference? I mean, I'll give you, for instance, instructional salary and wage costs. It says 30% local and 70% state. Where do those percentages, how are they calculated? I guess is a question that I would have. How would those percentages? And I understand the BEP formula plays into a local. How the local is calculated, but I'm just curious about where those 30% local and 70% state, what constitutes that?
Okay, Melissa Brown, Deputy Executive Director. So Michael has listed each of the categories of components that are in the BEP, and of course there's multiple items within those categories. But for example, the instructional salary and wages cost is 30% local, 70% state. That's in state statute. So if you add it up, if you're calculating the BEP for every school system in the state, and you add up all the salary and wage cost, and you get a bottom line total, all the locals together in the state are going to pay 30% of that amount, and the state will pay 70%. Now, of that 30%, that's what Michael's talking about today, the fiscal capacity. That 30% will vary by local based on its fiscal capacity. So there's usually only 1 or 2 school systems in the state that are at the 70-30 split. Some get more money from the state, some get less based on their local ability to raise revenue for education from their own resources. Does that help? So these splits right here are in state statute. So state statute says the state's going to pay 70% of the instructional salary and wages cost. That's the bottom line total of all 141 school systems added up.
Okay, you add them all together.
And you can take 70%
70%
of that one component.
of that one component.
Yes, sir.
And the locals are paying 30.
All
but
together.
individual
All of them
counties
together.
are different. I
Right.
mean, where I'm headed in this is, and obviously I'm not a fan of the BEP,
What?
but in Sevier County, it's almost the opposite of that.
Exactly.
figure.
And
It's
it-
almost the opposite.
and that's
Sevier
gonna-
County's paying almost 70% of the cost, and the state's picking up 30% of the cost.
And that's going to be based on your fiscal capacity and looking at all the pieces that go into measuring what Sevier County's fiscal capacity is.
Right.
And Michael's
But-
going to
but
talk
this-
about.
this. If you take all the state and put it together, this is what the law says it is.
Yes, sir.
Statewide.
Yes.
But each individual system is going to have a different
Fiscal capacity, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Laparda, I think you had tried to get. Oh, okay, all right. All right. Mr. Mount, any other questions before we let him get back on? Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but it's a blurred area, isn't it? That there aren't just, for example, instructional salary wage costs. Some of the other items, some of the other categories are also used for instructional wages, correct? So how does that skew the number, the percentages? In other words, some school systems use some of the instructional benefits or other classroom costs
Right.
money for instructional salaries.
Correct. But when you're calculating the BEP, it's going to be divided out. But you're right, when they spend it, so there's flexibility in the way you can spend. So non-classroom money can be spent anywhere in any category, as can other classroom cost. Instructional, each of those two categories have to be spent in instructional. So you're right. I could take money.
And do.
And absolutely they do, and move it to other categories. So when you get down to the spending, the state and local split will look different. But in terms of what is calculated and sent out, it's according to these categories and these percentages and the fiscal capacity applied.
Right. I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear that
you're right.
when you're spending, it's, there's no strict percentage like that on the spending.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, yes, Mayor?
Just as one follow-up, the instructional salaries and wages cost under the BEP, are you taking in the non-BEP formula for that total cost? I don't think you are. And for an example, Davidson County, Sevier, even Williamson County, I can tell you how many teachers we're paying for that are outside the BEP formula.
Correct.
Which is not included in your instructional salary.
So, again, the BEP is sometimes a cookie cutter approach.
No,
You're
ma'am.
you're gonna kind of, everybody gets the same components thrown in there. Everybody uses the same data, but what you get instructional salary and wages for, as you do any other position in the BEP, is what's generated within the BEP, not what you hire locally. So most school systems hire more teachers than what is generated in the BEP. And so when the General Assembly gives a pay raise, it's based on the number of positions within the BEP, not how many Williamson County actually has.
As a follow-up.
Sure.
Not to get into the debate with you, you are correct, but then there's this one element that's called the citizens. They want smaller classrooms.
Correct. So you're hiring more positions to meet that demand, and those positions are probably not covered by the BEP. So that's paid out of local dollars.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing.
But your salary wages do not go into that.
Do not go into the extra positions above the BEP. You're right. And it's, for most, not the salary you have to pay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Senator Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me, I'm new to this, so I just have a clarification question. How are the number of positions determined as far as BEP funding is concerned?
So there's the BEP Blue Book. It's on the State Board of Education's website. And so, for example, grades K through 3, it's one teacher for every 20 students. And that is determined by your average daily membership. So the old formula was calculated by average daily attendance, but now it's determined by average daily membership, because whether or not that child shows up for class, you have to provide a room, you have to provide a desk, you have to provide a teacher. And so it's from the student counts from each school system that are submitted to the Department of Education. Yes, ma'am. Well, actually, they submit them monthly. They submit them monthly, and then they submit a year-end count as well. And so they use those, and the class size standards are in state statute as well.
Mayor Huffman, or maybe it's County Executive Huffman, I'm sorry.
Whatever it is.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question I had is regarding industrial development, local governments, whether it's in the city or county, when there's an industrial development prospect who commits, builds a $500 million manufacturing plant, and there's a payment in lieu of tax structure that's usually set up through an industrial development corporation. When that happens, how does either the TACIR funding mechanism or the CBER funding mechanism in the fiscal capacity index, how does that handle industrial development pilot payments that go to local governments generally, and the education tax rate that's also in the pilot? How do the formulas, either one of those or both of them, handle that kind of a situation?
Both models have a property tax assessment factor. In CBER's model, the assessed value of the pilot properties are added to the property assessments. However, in TACIR's model, it's based on the 1993 to 1995 tax equivalent payments from a controller's report that has not since been updated. So any new pilot properties would only be reflected in CBER's model, but not in TACIR's model.
All right, so that could be considerable depending on, what the investment was for that particular manufacturing plant. Do we still use the 5-year average on 3-year average? So you use 5 and drop the earliest and the latest, or you just use 3?
It's rolling.
It's all right. Thank you.
All right. Mayor Waters, yes.
And I don't want to belabor all this, but this is just for my clarification. We've got 2 cities that have CBIDs and collect millions of dollars in sales tax, that 100% of that sales tax goes to the cities. In this formula, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're figuring as if that sales tax goes to the school systems and not 100% to the city. In other words, the formula is saying Sevier County collects X number of dollars of sales tax, and there's not a consideration about the fact that this significant portion of that sales tax goes 100% to the cities. It's just in one figure, and we're saying that it's all the same. Is that correct?
I think that's right.
That's correct.
It's any sales tax. It's
sales tax is sales tax in this formula.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if none of it's going to education or not. Is that correct? So that's one reason that we're about 70% and 30% for the state, is because that's a significant figure that's going to 100%. None of it goes to education. Yet in the formula, it says that education's getting a share of it, just like the rest of the sales tax. Just that point. Now you can go on. I'm sorry, I've caused all kinds of discussion.
Well, it's good discussion. May I ask a question? I understood that the 2.25, taking that as an average of the local sales tax, I understood 1/2 of that went to education. Except in those examples. Except under those. That's okay. Right. All right. I just wanted to make sure. Now, we studied this 2-3 years ago. Dr. Lepard, do you remember enough to give us a little update? Some counties do require that money. In Hamilton County, Volkswagen pays their portion of the school they don't pay taxes, but they pay their school portion. So I know that's how we do it in Hamilton County. No one gets one unless they agree to pay the percentage that goes to the schools. But do you mind bringing us up to date a little bit on that, Dr. Parr?
If I understand the question correctly, and I think this is the study you're referring to, Chairman, was the study we did just a year before last on payments in lieu of tax dollars and on local agreements on the sharing of those monies. And this came out of situations where one jurisdiction with a IDB was agreeing to return pilots to a developer without the approval of the other jurisdictions that might be affected by it. And the recommendation that the commission ended up making, and I believe was actually was adopted and passed into law, was that in the case of retail development, that there had to be some type of arrangement for a joint agreement on it, that one jurisdiction's IDP could not promise the tax dollars of the other jurisdictions. That was, I believe, the last time we looked at it. There's a lot of moving interrelated parts here. Also related to this, Michael mentioned that we still use the tax equivalency payment information, where the CBER now uses more updated IDB pilot information. And this is something that we've brought up to the BEP Review Committee and State Board of Education to try to get permission, if you will, to update our model. But whenever you make an update to a model with that has as much significance as the fiscal capacity models do, there's always winners and losers. So there's not been any updates to our portion of the model because of that.
All right. Thank you for that. Other questions or comments while we're at this?
And I said I wasn't going to make one,
no,
but
Mayor Waters, you're always welcome.
But the final thing I want to say is, under the CBID, that is state law, so we can't do an agreement about education. The cities get 100% of that money, and usually it's obligated to debt service on items they have in that CBID. So the education, we couldn't do an agreement like a pilot program. If you had an industry or something that agreed to pay the education portion of it, you can under state law, because on the CBID, at 100% goes to the cities.
All right. Other questions, comments? Mr. Yant? Mr. Mount? I'm sorry.
Fiscal capacity answers the question, what is each county's ability to pay for education from its own sources? The model is a county level model, which means that for counties with more than one school system, their fiscal capacity, they will be treated as if they have the same fiscal capacity. A TACIR model is calculated using a multiple regression analysis, which is used to determine the weights of the 5 factors in the model, which I will discuss in the next 2 slides. These weights are then multiplied through by the actual values for each of those components. Here are the factors. First, there's own source revenue, which is the dependent variable. Then the tax basis, sales tax base per student, and equalized property assessment per student. The other factors are equalized residential and farm assessment divided by the total equalized assessment. This is the res farm variable. And per capita income. Finally, there's the ADM divided by population, or the service burden factor, which is the final factor. Here are the relationships between each factor and fiscal capacity. You can see from the first 3, the green up arrows, increases in property tax base, sales tax base, and per capita income are correspond to increasing fiscal capacity, whereas for residential farm, as a share of total property assessments, and the service burden Increases in those factors correspond to decreases in fiscal capacity. A county's fiscal capacity indexes all have to add up to 100%. And so one county's fiscal capacity percentage depends on whether its factors are growing faster or slower than the 95 county average. And here are the long-term trends in fiscal capacity across the state. You can see in the green are counties where the fiscal capacity is increasing. Blue it's remaining about the same, and yellow, the fiscal capacity percentage is decreasing. And here, Nathan Schaefer referenced this earlier, and it makes sense for us to mention this within the context of fiscal capacity because local sales tax base is one of the factors. Rule 129, which is set to be enforced October 1st, 2019, will increase local option sales tax revenue by $17.7 million according to the fiscal note in 2019-20 and $23.6 million in subsequent years, again according to the fiscal note. And this is in contrast to the an earlier fiscal note, $59.4 million per year, and that earlier fiscal note was what we utilized in our latest internet sales tax report. Here, I just have a chart here showing personal income growth and also local sales tax base growth for the last few years. And you can see the brown columns is local sales tax growth. And for the past several years, it has outpaced personal income growth. And I just point that out to say that according to Department of Revenue, a lot of the revenue from internet sales tax has already been collected, and that's from sellers that have voluntarily begun collecting sales tax. And here is just point out that the 2.25% uniform rate option was eliminated, and so instead the local option sales tax rate of the destination of the sale will be applied. This year the revisions to per capita income were significant. You can see that they're much larger than what they were last year. And these revisions were caused because of an update to commuting estimates. And this is because personal income is a measure of income by the county of residence, and it's adjusted for commuters that are either leaving or entering the county. Here's a statement by the Bureau of Economic Analysis explaining the cause of the large revisions. And it just says that they updated those commuting estimates. And here are the counties that were most affected by the revisions. You can see there's both significant positive revisions and negative revisions. Here I have a chart of combined sales and property tax bases, both for Tennessee and Hamilton County. And this is just to show what it takes just to keep about the same fiscal capacity percentage. You need to grow at roughly the same pace as the state overall. And on the earlier slide where I had the state and the trends for each of the counties, Hamilton was blue, which meant that it is steady. And here you can see that Hamilton's growth in sales and property tax base has been roughly the same as the state overall. And finally, I'll conclude just by saying that, again, that each county's fiscal capacity, if their fiscal capacity percentage increases, then the other 94 counties' combined fiscal capacity percentage has to decrease by the same amount. So that is my presentation. Are there any questions?
Yeah, in slide number 10, you talked about the state shared local there. What about the state's expectation for the money that they are actually, the numbers were adjusted. Ours was adjusted down from 59 to 17. The state was expecting what my recollection is 200 million, but that may be wrong. What is there now? What is that number now that they've adjusted that?
I don't have that number in front of me. I think it was 160 million was the number we used in our report.
Yeah, so that's gone down,
It's
though.
been revised down as well.
All right, so even with that, I would just, I guess, in this conversation that we've just been having about the ability for the different school systems to actually pay the number of teachers that they have, I just would, there was a part of the discussion we had as a subcommittee in the sales tax discussion about the money that was going to the state and our recommendation that that additional money be used to help fund education. And we came to an agreement on that as county mayors and city municipal representatives as well. And so I just would point out again that if the system is broken. I mean, the fact that we're still using 93 through 95 just means we're scared to fix it. So if we're going to continue to have that fear, at least, please, let's be reminding through this report that that money, the additional money coming in from the sales tax to the state could be used to pay for, as it did this last time, the SRO officers. And so finding ways to help pay for those educational needs outside of BEP, because BEP is broken. So, that's always subjective, and so you're going to get the same kind of pushback on some of that. But until we fix BEP, in order to fund some of these things, I think we have to look at that pot of money that's going to the state that they have not previously had, and ask them to look at ask you all as legislators to look at using some of that money to pay for these needs that we have that, again, apply statewide. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. LaParte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mayor McDonald, I strongly suspect that that's a theme that was in the first interim report and our local revenue and services report that'll be picked up in the next interim report on education funding. And I also suspect this will be a topic of some discussion during the panel tomorrow morning when we'll have the panel on education funding and responsibilities. So I would say keep that question in mind.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Representative Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation on the BEP. We have federal funds that come down, and we also have state funds, and then the locals match as part of the whole BEP process or funding formula.
Yeah.
So yes, there's state, federal, and local funds, and so the way school systems account for those, state and local are combined into the same pot of money, and then the federal is kept separate in a separate category because often there's accountability requirements for the different pots of money, like the Title I and the ESEA.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my question. So the Title I funds come down, and do they impact the amount of state dollars that are allocated to a school system?
In terms of federal dollars, but not through the BEP. It's its own standalone formula.
Okay.
Now, what it can provide is additional staffing
Right.
through the federal dollars
Okay.
that a system might not otherwise be able to afford.
So there's no situation where school system drawing down a good number of federal Title I funds would have their state allocation reduced?
No.
Okay.
No. Now, the only thing that I have seen is sometimes a teacher, based on their assigned responsibilities, will be partially funded by federal funds and partially by state and local. That can happen. But they just have to meet the responsibilities of each part of their position.
And at the state level, we're not permitted to even direct any.
I think I know where you're going. They're not allowed to supplant the federal dollars with state and local, or supplant state and local with federal.
Well, no, I was thinking about that. We can't legislate how, because they have to meet a federal threshold for Title I, so we can't direct which schools could receive.
Honestly, you're getting to an area that I'm not as familiar with. I just know there's a lot of requirements and accountability standards from the feds based on those funds.
Right. School districts can decide where they're going to spend the Title I funds based on a threshold, but we can't give direction on that. Okay.
Because there's outlined in state statute how the local budget is approved, and what's approved by the school board, what's approved by the county commission or the city governing body.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none, Mr. Mount. Apparently, we're going to continue that discussion in the morning, maybe expound on it some. Next, tab 7. Mr. Carpenter, Senior Research Associate. Sounds like you have a very interesting, give us something good to talk about at dinner tonight. You are?
I'm on now, right? Can
Yes.
you hear me? Excellent.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, sir. I'm confused.
I'll defer to Executive Director.
Let's go ahead and do the presentation, and then if we want to hear from anyone additional.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the Commission. My name is Tyler Carpenter. Today I'll be presenting the draft report on credit to shippers' franchise and excise tax liability for your review and comment. The report was prepared in response to Public Chapter 952, Acts of 2018, directing the Commission to study a proposal that would provide a franchise and excise tax credit of 2% to any shipper that implements a turnaround policy to ensure that pickups and deliveries are performed on time. The credit would not exceed 50% of the combined franchise and excise tax liability before any credit is taken. The shipper would also provide contact information for the authorized parties involved in the pickup and delivery. The proposal would be a pilot program that would only apply to companies with pickups or deliveries originating or terminating in Shelby County. A copy of the act may be found in Appendix A. Before I go any further, I'm going to define a couple terms used in the legislation. The act defines a shipper as a person that enters into a contract for transportation services with a motor carrier. The act defines a motor carrier as a person who operates or causes to be operated a freight motor vehicle on a public highway for the purpose of performing transportation services. Under this definition, companies and drivers count as motor carriers. To track with everyday usage in my presentation, I mean companies when I refer to motor carriers, and individuals when I refer to drivers. And next, I'm going to give you a little background on the issue of driver detention. Tennessee's economy depends on the efficient movement of goods, with well over a third of the state's gross domestic product attributable to industries and businesses that rely heavily on freight transportation. Approximately $110 billion of the $280 billion of all goods and services produced in 2012. Trucks carry most shipments originating in Tennessee, 78.1% of shipments by value and 87.6% by weight. Trucking industry profitability improves with productivity, and productivity improves when drivers can pick up and deliver their loads as scheduled. But drivers sometimes experience delays known as driver detention while waiting at shipping and receiving facilities. Such delays can be costly to motor carriers, drivers, shippers, and the overall economy. A 2018 report by the United States Department of Transportation, Office of Inspector General, estimated that detention reduces motor carrier net income by $250.6 million to $302.9 million annually. Consistent driver income is a factor whether people choose to become and remain truck drivers. And driver recruitment and retention are critical to the industry, which faces competition from other businesses for qualified employees. According to the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics, drivers are usually paid based on the number of miles driven, plus bonuses, but the per mile rate varies by employer and often by driver experience and the type of cargo. According to the May 2018 Occupational and Employment Statistics data produced by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, truck drivers earn an average wage of $43,660 in Tennessee, which is below the average annual wage of $45,570 nationwide. Based on the report by the Office of Inspector General, detention is associated with reductions in annual earnings of between $1,281 and $1,534 per driver per year for truckload drivers. Although some drivers occasionally receive pay for detention time, industry stakeholders say such pay is often difficult to get and not always much as drivers would receive if they were on the road. The effect of detention time on pay is magnified by a Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration requirement that limits drivers' hours of service to 14 hours on duty, 11 of which may be used for driving. And that requirement is magnified by new mandated technology that makes it easier to track driver time. If you'll now turn to page 11, you'll see the franchise and excise tax credits that are already available to eligible businesses. And I want to point out here that Public Chapter 501 Acts of 2019 repealed the broadband internet access tax credit that is listed at the bottom of that table, and that will be repealed as of July 1st, 2019, but it's currently available. Proponents of the proposal in Public Chapter 952 say the incentive would encourage quicker turnaround and increase the amount of freight shipped in Tennessee because more freight can be hauled with the same number of drivers if they are not slowed down by excessive delays. And as a result, profitability would increase and drivers' incomes would then be more consistent. However, it is unclear what effect an incentive would have considering the number of companies already taking advantage of the 10 existing franchise and excise tax credits, including some portion of the 222 businesses that have reduced their franchise and excise tax liability to zero by using the industrial machinery tax credit and the additional annual jobs tax credit, both indirectly related to trucking through the shipment of product. The proposed credit's effect is also unclear because it would be available to companies already in compliance with the proposed turnaround policy, and there is no enforcement mechanism to ensure that the policy is actually implemented and maintained for those not already in compliance. Though they agree that driver detention is a problem plaguing the trucking industry, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and the American Trucking Associations say driver detention should be negotiated between shippers and motor carriers without government intervention, citing a market efficiency problem. The Tennessee Trucking Association likewise says that generally, driver detention issues should be worked out between shippers and motor carriers, but anything that reduces delays for drivers would be welcomed. A representative with the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association said that any specific limit on load or unload time could result in shippers becoming more restrictive and requiring all drivers to schedule appointments, removing flexibility for a driver stuck in traffic or at another shipping facility. And next, I'm going to discuss what is already being done to improve turnaround times. According to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, all commercial motor vehicles must be equipped with an electronic logging device, which is intended to help improve truck driver safety and make it easier to track, manage, and share drivers' hours of service. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration explains that an electronic logging device synchronizes with a vehicle's engine to automatically record driving time for easier, more accurate hours of service recording. Motor carriers and drivers are also using electronic logging devices to monitor and document a driver's movement and track when drivers are detained at shipping facilities. The Tennessee Trucking Association's president said that motor carriers can gather data and approach a shipper with evidence for why the shipper should improve their processes. If a shipper is unwilling or unable to improve their processes, motor carriers have at least two options to address the excessive detention and its effect on profitability and consistent driver pay. They can raise their rates to compensate the driver or tell the shipper to find another carrier. Some motor carriers are also using electronic logging device technology to require that shippers pay drivers for detention time. The administrator of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration said in an interview that the electronic logging devices could be a step towards holding shippers and receivers accountable for long detention times. With the added pressure of the electronic logging device mandate, motor carriers and drivers are using data from electronic logging devices to determine which shippers they will do business with. A nationwide survey by a logistics company found that 80% of carriers said there are now facilities they will absolutely not load from. 43% of carriers state the amount of shippers and receivers they refuse to go to has increased since the electronic logging device mandate. Shippers are already beginning to adapt to the realities of this new business environment by improving efficiency. Some shippers are making changes to their facilities to improve efficiency. They're reducing wait times by reducing paperwork. They are offering what is known as drop and hook, which allows the driver to drop off the trailer and hook onto another trailer, and they are using technology to locate trailers quickly. Some logistics companies say shippers that want to receive priority from motor carriers should provide appointment flexibility, improve check-in and check-out processes, avoid lane changes, and add weekend pickup and delivery. Efficiency improvements by motor carriers and shippers are made easier with advancements in technology. Companies have developed software that lets drivers schedule terminal times and rate shippers. This is being used by both motor carriers and independent drivers to help determine which shippers to work with. Owner-operators and shippers are benefiting from enhancements in GPS location tracking, following shipments in real time. This allows shippers to better schedule deliveries and pickups, improving turnaround times. Motor carriers are also using GPS technology to measure the time a driver arrives and departs a warehouse. Some companies advertise a fully automated process connecting drivers and shippers with little to no human interaction. Because the logistics and transportation industry is already using new technology to streamline logistics and improve efficiency, Because there is no enforcement mechanism to ensure that the policy is actually implemented and maintained, and because it is unclear whether the proposed franchise and excise tax credit would result in reduced turnaround time, greater productivity, and more consistent driver pay, the Commission recommends that the proposed credit not be adopted at this time. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, questions? All right, Mayor? No, we're not, we'll call you when we're ready, okay? Thank you. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to say that I had a whole new understanding of the trucking industry and what they encounter after the presentation that we had at the last meeting. And in trying to get here this morning and watching all those trucks that were stopped as I was because of the lane changes, I was wondering, you know, this is another thing that compounds that and reduces their active time that they can be productive and get to their destination. So am I understanding that we've had the report, we're not recommending to do anything at this time except the pilot study? Is that what it is for Shelby County? Is that what this is saying?
The report is not recommending that the policy and the legislation be adopted this time.
Well, I would like to see that we, just like we were talking about the BEP, that we monitor this somehow, that there be a report, because it's not just Shelby County. I think it's nationwide that we have truckers that are having problems, and you have a shortage of drivers, and we talked about that at the last time, and we have, you know, around our area in East Tennessee, we have a couple of companies that have come in to start training truckers, and so there has to be some reason to, I think longevity and retaining your drivers was another problem there too. And we all, you know, we want it when we want it, and we don't realize what's going on behind it. So I feel for the industry. I had, you know, a better understanding, and I really think that we need to keep in touch with this and see what we could do if we're not going to do something at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Other questions or comments? Anyone? All right, we have with us Brandon Musso, is that correct? Anything else?
Unless the Commission
Yeah,
has
why
anything
don't
else.
you just stay there in case you want. Mr.
Yeah, of
Musso,
course.
you're from CAT Global, is
Yes,
that
sir.
correct? And were you one of the speakers? I was enthralled by the presentation last time. It was incredibly interesting.
Yes, sir.
I think you
That
were
was
here
great.
then. All right. And you had asked to speak, and you're welcome to do so, happy to do so. But normally we don't take outside testimony. Today you've come. We're happy to do that.
I appreciate
If you
that.
could limit your comments to 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure. So I've taken 20 years of my life in this industry, and I've taken every ounce of personal vacation to lobby for this bill. I'm in it every single day. To be honest, thank you, Tyler. Thank you, David. The full report doesn't give a justification of what the problem that we have. Tennessee could be the first to really go out there and do something different. But that report is very one-sided, very narrow-minded, to be completely honest.
And excuse me, Mr. Smith, the report you're talking about is the report that Mr. Tyler just gave?
Correct.
Oh, okay. All right.
So everybody's clear. So detention time, if that truck is not moving, okay, it's the driver or the truck is not making money, okay? It's a huge, huge, huge problem. So again, if you see them in docks, right, the truck is never making money. So Tennessee is one of the worst, okay? So again, a lot of the reports that was focused in this study, a lot of very good information was left out, okay? I'll give you an example. The tensions in this same report left in, and again, I'm in it every single day. We will get behind if we don't do something in the state of Tennessee. It will go to Mississippi, I can assure you, okay? I can promise you that. It is a very industry problem. I've been in transport topics, very industry journals, a lot of very familiar faces in here. It will go national in some capacity. If Tennessee doesn't do the first to do it, it's going to go in a different state to do it. So let me quote a same article that was referenced. Well, first, let me give you the capacity problem. So driver shortage was not even mentioned in the study that we spent this money on, okay? There's about 70,000 drivers short right now in the industry. It's a very soft market, but again, whether there's capacity or not, there's not drivers moving that truck. Forget about autonomy or Uber freight and everything that was in this study is going to make less than a 5% impact capacity-wise. So if fuel gets high, which is coming, right? If capacity flips a little bit, we will see that. We will see another capacity shortage. Does Tennessee want to be left behind or not? Okay? So yesterday, these are facts. Sorry, I'll walk around. These are facts from yesterday. From reefers, refrigerated unit.
Yeah, you're going to need to stay by the mic or you won't broadcast on the internet.
Sure. Yeah, I have a problem walking around. Refrigerated unit, okay? There was 85 trucks in the area. There was 413 loads in the area yesterday, okay? So a ratio, so every load they had in the area in Memphis yesterday, there's 5 loads to every truck. Flatbeds, right, that you see on the road that have flatbeds with the tarps over, there were 2,065 loads in Memphis yesterday. There's 27 trucks. Dry vans, what I move a lot, I see it every day. I'm in the spot market every day. There were 646 trucks in the area. There were 234 loads in the area. Does that study bring up, I don't know if you guys really read it, did you guys really understand the capacity issue based on yesterday's numbers? And I'll leave this for you guys. If one thing happens in this market, it's done. Absolutely done. We have to do something in the state of Tennessee, period. So Tennessee is also what? The largest fatality rate in the country. Let me read this to you. Same story that...
You're at 4 minutes.
Okay, same story that TACIR, every truck driver has lived through it, and most do on a regular basis. According to DAT, which I run into every day, 63% of drivers spend more than 3 hours waiting to be loaded or unloaded at a shipper's dock. Detention times of between 3 and 4 hours are typical. Reported 54 drivers wait more than 5 hours or longer at time. This is what this bill is trying to stop. So again, if it's not exactly written how we see it against franchise and excise tax, what can we do that's different? Because we are absolutely missing. I'm telling you. You have an opportunity as legislators and lawmakers to really do something here. And I'm sorry if I'm getting emotional. We're missing the boat. We're absolutely missing the boat. Hold on. I'm going to give you the fatality number.
All right, that's 5 minutes and 15 seconds. If you'd wrap up, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to give this one the fatality because, it means lives in general. Okay, here we go. Detention is an issue for the industry, particularly for truck drivers. He must sit and wait. This is what this legislation is trying to get away, right? So this legislation is trying to promote more the trucks moving, okay? According to Keep Trucking, drivers who are detained for a shipper or receiver for more at least 2 hours of drive time average 3.5 miles an hour faster once leaving the facility and forwards to making lost time. 75% of drivers suffer such an instance at least once a week. 35% must wait at least 6 hours of time.
All right.
So 15% of time, we're as a state, I know I'm getting shut off. As a state, we're not recognizing shippers' loading and unload time. So again, if it's not franchise and excise tax, let's do something different. I'm all about it. Right. TACIR's done a great job of discovering that, but we will get passed by another state. We will not be able, on the record, citizens for looking out for our drivers on the road. We will not do it.
Mr. Musso, can we ask some questions?
Yes, sir.
If you'd stop, we'd be glad to do that.
Sure.
Yes, sir, Mayor McDonald.
Well, I think my question goes to staff first. I understand your passion for doing something, but in all the testimony I've heard and what I have read, it seems like we're chasing the wrong dog. The idea of an excise, this tax credit, solving the problem of waiting too long doesn't seem to be the answer. This appears to me to be a federal problem where they limit that, they don't recognize that detention time. And I would hope that as those of us who might have influence in Washington and those agencies, that we would stand behind this industry to try to get a more fair representation and still make it safe, because to your point on fatalities, one of the problems was the amount of time they were driving and not sleeping. So being able, now that you have this fancy equipment, being able to tell if they're really getting enough rest is important, because I came up last night between 8 and 11 o'clock and passed a lot of your fellow employees, and I want to be sure they've had plenty of sleep at night when I've got my family in the car. So I hear your passion to do something for the industry. I share that passion. I just conclude the same thing that staff did, that the federal excise credit is not the answer. I think dealing with detention time is the answer, and that appears to me, with what limited knowledge I have, to be a federal issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Love, I have you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and mine goes to staff also. You listed out on page 10 the report that at least 222 of the taxpayers have been able to reduce the franchise and excise tax liability to zero through a combination of tax credits, so by using the industry machinery tax credit, additional annual jobs tax credit. And it's my understanding that you're using that as a justification to say that the program would not be very beneficial because you already have 222 taxpayers reducing the tax credit down to zero. Is my understanding correct?
Kind of. So it's part of a larger argument. When we looked at the franchise and excise tax credits, we spoke with the Department of Revenue, and we got some figures in, and the average, I believe it was for franchise, it's in the report. Yeah, so it's on page 10. Beyond just the 222, the average franchise tax liability, after all credits are considered, is around $4,000, and then for the excise, it's around $26,000. And so the combination of that with the 222 businesses that have no liability, staff was, looking at, like I said, a number of things. That was part of it, was the small numbers and the fact that a lot of those big companies that are even headquartered or regionally headquartered in Memphis, we don't know this for sure because of privacy laws, but are likely taking advantage of a franchise and excise tax, reducing that to nothing.
I guess my question is this. There are 200,648 taxpayers with franchise tax after credits. There's 55,238 taxpayers with excise tax after credits, but only 222 have reduced it to zero.
Yes, sir.
Maybe I'm reading the numbers wrong, but that still leaves a lot of people. At least on some instances, maybe 200,000 businesses, or taxpayers, maybe 55,000 taxpayers on the other end who might benefit from it. And I guess for me, that would be one of the benefits of a pilot program, would be able to see who might benefit from it, who might take advantage of it, who might be inspired or encouraged or incentivized to maybe implement a turnaround time to reduce the wait and to this wait time and maybe even encourage some folks to go into the business. I guess that's why my point is about a pilot program. It's not suggesting that it be statewide, but just specifically to look at a certain area where there seems to be a high issue, and then say, if we discover that it doesn't work, then we can go to the option of finding something else. But the point of a pilot, I think, is to take a look at one specific area with one specific solution, and then if it doesn't work, you can move on to it. I think that in scientific terms, that's how you develop solutions. You get a hypothesis, you test it, right? And then if you look at your results, if the results do not bear out what the research you thought would, then you move on. And I guess for me, I'm just hearing about fatalities, hearing about this other thing. My concern is that, and I do appreciate the research that's gone into that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also, Tyler.
Other questions?
thank you.
Other comments?
I have one more.
Yes, sir,
Remind
Mr.
me.
Musso,
I know you're
please.
tired of me, but
No,
again, I'm
not at
passionate.
all. Thank you for coming.
'Cause
I just
we-
didn't know you were coming. That wasn't scheduled.
I wouldn't. Again, I took a vacation day to come here to be able to do this. Again, we are missing the boat if we don't do something. I'm telling you. You had Technicolor, you had Louis Dreyfus on record last time we were here on record, the testimony, say how this program would help their organizations, not from a financial perspective, just as a moving freight. You have the two biggest companies in Shelby County saying it works. Why don't you look deeper into it? We already know the misfits of Memphis that we've had to do and deal with that. So when you're thinking about it, and again, all I want to do, I'm not here to dispute it. I want to prove it right. If it doesn't work, great. It has to go deeper than the study. The study is not looking at the facts. It's truly not. And I'll leave you with this. In 2000, and I don't know why there's 2011, 2012 data in this study, which is beyond me, okay? In 2016, the Department of Transportation began collecting data on detention time in late January of this year. While DOT, Department of Transportation, found every 15-minute increase in dwell time, detention like we've been talking about, the total time spent by a truck at a facility increases the average expected crash rate by 6.2%. That is not at all in this study. It's a shame. We have to be smarter as a state. We have to be. And we're not being smart. Try to think about it, but I can tell you, this goes to Mississippi. Look at Orgill. Look at Crone, North America. Go into Olive Branch. Think about it, man. We're missing opportunities in the state. This study does not give it justification. It does not. All right. We're missing the boat. We're missing our point of record and our citizens' livelihood at stake. And I will put this, let's be smart. We're just trying to try. Let's be smart. That's all I ask. Thank you for your time.
Mayor McDonald, you recognize?
I love you. I love what you're trying to do, but you just hit a nerve with me.
I'm sorry?
You're talking about some of the smartest people in Tennessee.
Agreed.
You're not smarter than them. And to say that this doesn't take into consideration is a low blow to these professionals?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
Yes, sir, you just did. And you said it multiple times. So please rein in your emotions.
Yes, sir.
And let's not take personal shots at these good people because they do great work.
Absolutely.
Mr. Musso, do you mind to let him speak? He didn't interrupt you. You don't interrupt him.
Yes, sir.
So,
Go ahead, Mayor.
So I want to be on record as everyone here. We believe in these people. If you had been here in the early part of this discussion, we had some people leave, we had some new people come on, and we talked about what great work is done by this commission. And these are brilliant people. Now, nobody, again, your emotions, I think, have just gotten away from you. I think you've not thought before I hope you've not thought before you spoke, and I would just encourage you to rein that in so that you're not taking personal attacks on people for something that they don't have a stake in.
Sure.
They don't have
Yes,
they
sir.
don't have a stake in this, in a personal income matter. It doesn't, they don't gain or lose anything by coming up with this conclusion, but you imply that they do. And I like I say, I care a lot about you and what you're trying to promote, but I'm disappointed in the way you just did it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, you're excused, Mr. Musso.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other matters to come before us today? Are we at that point? All right, we'll be in adjournment till 8:30 in the morning. Thank you.
And members, you may leave your docket material.
Should be here in the morning.